I never imagined that night could change the course of my life so much. The dim lights of the bar, the jazz music that filled the air, and my glass of red wine brought me to a state of relaxation that I had not felt in a long time. Before I continue, I ask you to give a like to the video and subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything, and you help me to continue bringing more stories. Thank you. Let's continue. I was sitting in a secluded corner, absent-mindedly, watching the people coming and going, their glances crossing each other's eyes and smiles hidden behind glasses. My husband, Marcos, was at home as usual, too tired to join me. Our nightly outings had become a distant memory, buried under routine and daily responsibilities. I felt lonely, even though I was surrounded by people. It was at that moment that I noticed them. Two tall, dark-skinned men, dressed with impeccable elegance. They entered the bar. There was something about them that captured attention, a magnetic presence that attracted glances, including mine. They did not go unnoticed. And when one of them looked at me, my heart skipped a beat. I don't know what made me smile. In a deep, confident voice, I couldn't say no. That night took a different turn than all the others. As we talked, I discovered that their names were Samuel and Javier, two businessmen who were in town for a while, away from their families, and looking for some company. Samuel was eloquent and charming, with an infectious laugh that made me forget all my worries for a moment. Javier, on the other hand, had a penetrating gaze and spoke little, but his every word seemed thought out and precise. Time passed quickly, and when I looked at the clock, I realized that it was almost 2 a.m. Marcos had neither written nor called. He was probably already asleep, oblivious to what was going on. I sighed and got up to leave, but Samuel gently took my hand. "Don't leave yet," he whispered. There was a note of mystery in his voice, an implicit invitation to prolong the night. But I knew it was dangerous, but not before slipping a small piece of paper into my purse, saying nothing. My mind was a whirlwind as I walked home, wondering what I had in my hands and why a part of me felt so excited. The ride home was a whirlwind of emotions. My mind kept going back to that night over and over again, to Samuel and Javier, to the conversations, the laughter and the electricity I felt being around them. When I got home, the darkness greeted me with its cold embrace. Marcos was already asleep, his calm, rhythmic breathing filling the silence. I sat on the edge of the bed for a few minutes, the paper Samuel had slipped into my bag in my hand. My heart pounded as I read the handwritten words. "If you want to discover a side of you that you have forgotten, call this number." Samuel, I tried to convince myself that it was just a game, a temporary escape from routine. But the paper remained on my nightstand as a constant reminder of what I could do, of a path I had not yet traveled. The next few days were a whirlwind of thoughts, and every time my gaze rested on that paper, a shiver ran down my spine. Marcos was getting busier and busier with work. The endless meetings and business trips had increased, and I, without realizing it, began to feel a disconnect between us that I couldn't ignore. In my mind, the memories of shared laughter and Samuel and Javier's intense looks became a refuge, a reminder that there was still a spark inside me that was not willing to be extinguished. One night while Marcos was working in his office, my phone vibrated on the table. It was a message from an unknown number, thinking of you. "I hope what you saw that night is still on your mind, Samuel." My breathing quickened, and a mixture of fear and excitement came over me. I didn't know how he had gotten my number, but the simple fact that he had made me feel something I hadn't felt in years, desired. I tried not to answer, but curiosity and desire were stronger. "How did you get my number?" I finally wrote, with my fingers trembling. It didn't take long for the answer to come. Sometimes, when you want something badly enough, you find a way. That night, as Mark gave me a distracted kiss on my forehead before bed, I felt a pang of guilt. But that guilt was quickly drowned out by a need to live something else. Something that would shake me up and make me feel again. My days passed in a kind of trance, waiting for that next message. That spark that would break me out of the monotony. Finally, an invitation arrived. Saturday there is an evening at a special place. Come if you want more answers. Samuel and Javier will be there. I read it over and over again, torn between caution and temptation. I knew that going to that invitation would be like crossing a threshold from which there would be no turning back. But the idea of carrying on as if nothing had happened was unbearable. Saturday came, and after hours of hesitation, I decided to go. I carefully dressed up, choosing a dress I hadn't worn in a long time. One that reminded me of who I was before I got lost in the routine. I arrived at the right place, an elegant salon in the center of the city, with soft music and warm lights that created an intimate atmosphere. Samuel and Javier were there, and their smiles when they saw me made me feel that I had made the right decision, even though it was a dangerous one. The night passed between conversations, glances, and a growing complicity. They told me more about their lives, their travels, and anecdotes. And the more they talked, the more I felt trapped in their world, a world of secrets and freedoms I had never known before. The clock struck midnight when Samuel approached me, staring at me. Have you ever wondered what would have happened if you had taken a different path? His voice was a whisper, and the question, more than a simple curiosity, seemed like an invitation to explore the unknown. I hesitated for a second, but before I could answer, Javier came closer and added with an enigmatic smile, "Sometimes the answers are not found in what we already know, but in what we are willing to discover." I felt my heart pounding, caught in a dilemma between loyalty to a safe life and the urge to live something that would remind me of who I really was. But that night, I decided to go no further. With a nervous smile, I excused myself and walked away, feeling their gazes on my back as I left. As I left the salon, the cool night air hit my face, waking me from that sort of slumber I had been immersed in for the past few hours. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, gazing out at the illuminated city and listening to the murmur of conversations that I wished were going on behind me. I felt a whirlwind of emotions inside me, adrenaline, guilt, and a small spark of satisfaction that I had been brave enough to peer over the edge of the unknown, but not fall. The ride home was silent. The streets, normally bustling, were quiet at that hour. Each step echoed in my head as a reminder of what I was about to risk. When I arrived, Marcos was sleeping soundly, as always. I watched him for a moment, wondering if he had ever noticed how distant I felt, or if he was so immersed in his world that he simply didn't notice. The next few days passed slowly. Samuel and Javier didn't write to me, and the absence of their messages was both a relief and an emptiness at the same time. I went back to the routine. Work, housework, trivial conversations with Marcos. Everything was still the same, but inside me something had changed. I found myself looking at my phone from time to time, waiting for a signal that never came. One afternoon, while I was in the kitchen preparing dinner, the phone vibrated. It was a message from Javier. "I know you made the decision you felt was right, and I respect that. But if you ever want to talk or just remember what it's like to feel alive, here we are." I read and reread the message, feeling a mixture of relief and longing. I responded with a simple, "Thank you, I'll keep that in mind." However, that night something unexpected happened. While Marcos and I were having dinner, he mentioned that his brother, Alejandro, was coming to visit us with his new partner. I didn't think much of it until the door opened, and I saw who was standing next to him. It was Laura, an old friend from college, a woman who knew a version of me that I had buried a long time ago. Laura looked at me in surprise, but with a smile that hid 1,000 questions. Over dinner, we talked of times past, of people and places I hadn't remembered for years. However, on more than one occasion, I noticed that her gaze rested on me with a curiosity that made me nervous. I knew something. I had heard rumors. The uneasiness grew in my chest. After dinner, when Marcos and Alejandro went out to the balcony to talk about their things, Laura approached me. "Elena has been a long time," she said with a tone that seemed loaded with a hidden meaning. "Is she still the same as always, or is there something new in your life?" My heart stopped for a second. "Of course there is, the same as always," I answered, trying to sound casual, although the trembling in my hands gave me away. Laura looked at me with an enigmatic smile, and before I could say anything else, she continued, "I hope that if there is something you want to tell me, you know you can trust me." The phrase hung in the air, like a warning or an offer, and left me with a mixture of relief and suspicion. That night, while everyone slept and the house was plunged into darkness, I lay awake, tossing and turning on Laura's words. She knew more than she was letting on, and if so, what was she planning to do with that information? The weight of the secrets began to feel more real than ever. A couple of days passed after Laura's visit, and my mind kept turning over her words. Restlessness and tension mixed with the italgia of what I had felt that night with Samuel and Javier. I was at a point of no return, caught between the life I knew and the temptation of the unknown. One afternoon, while Marcos was in one of his endless work meetings, I received a message from Samuel. "We would like to see you. No expectations, just a moment to share." I stared at the message for several minutes, feeling the tension in my chest grow until it became almost unbearable. I got ready as if it was the first time I was going to see them, choosing an outfit that made me feel confident and powerful. I left the house before Marcos returned, leaving no notes or explanation. The night was cool, and the city seemed to breathe a different air, full of promises and secrets. I arrived at the studio, which was illuminated with a soft golden light. Samuel greeted me with a smile that mixed surprise and satisfaction. Javier, sitting on the sofa with a glass in his hand, looked up and his expression softened when he saw me. "I'm glad you came, Helena," he said in that low, calm voice that made me feel an electric current run down my back. The conversation began casually, but the tension in the air was palpable. Every smile, every accidental brush of his hands reminded me of what was about to happen. Samuel moved closer, fixed on mine. "Sometimes, life gives us a chance to change everything, if only for an instant," he murmured as his hand gently brushed mine. The air became heavy, heavy with desire. My breathing quickened, and I felt the distance between us vanish. Javier stood up and moved closer, his presence imposing and warm at the same time. All that I had held back, all the inner struggle and fear, vanished in an instant. My thoughts were extinguished, and all that remained was the moment, the touch of skin, the shared warmth, and the glances that spoke of unconfessed desires. Samuel and Javier were different, each bringing a different intensity. Samuel, with his impetuous passion, made me lose my breath, while Javier, with his calm and tenderness, made every second feel eternal. One more door, the room seemed to revolve around us, and the outside world blurred into a distant echo. Time lost its meaning. What began as a night of conversation became an experience that broke the barriers of convention. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains, we stood in silence, still entwined, feeling our shared breath. "This changes nothing and changes everything at the same time," Samuel said, stroking my hair, and I knew he was right. What had happened would remain etched in me, a memory I could not erase, but also a burden I would have to carry. Guilt began to creep in on the fringes of my mind, pushing against the pleasure that still throbbed on my skin. When I finally got up to leave, Javier took my hand and held it for a second longer than necessary. "You are not alone, Elena. Whatever happens, remember that." I nodded, speechless, and left the studio with my heart beating a mile a minute, knowing that the life I had would never be the same again. When I got home, the morning light illuminated the living room, and I felt the weight of reality fall on me like a slab. Marcos had not yet returned, and in the silence of the house, the echo of the night before resounded louder than ever. The story is over now, but if you want to hear other stories of secrets and lies, click on one of the videos you see on the screen, and remember to subscribe to the channel to receive new stories every day.